And, as you may find in uh, the teachings of the Monro, that one should consider you know, uh, the act of receiving teachings as well as from the teacher's part as well, imparting the teachings as a practice. So therefore, in our tradition, we always remind not only the listeners, but even the speaker to tune our motivation that we are teaching or we are listening to the teachings, not for oneself, for one's own benefit, but for the benefit of all sentient beings. Okay. So as usual, diving into the wisdom chapter. So we completed till the third stanza last time. So we will begin with the fourth stanza. The first two lines. Within whose ranks the lower in degrees of insight are confuted by the higher. So here the word whose refers to the yogis. So within yogis' ranks, the lower in degrees of insight are confuted by the higher. So on the first day, we discussed that there are two types of beings, the ordinary beings and the sublime beings, or the yogis. And they have their viewpoints. When the ordinary beings perceive the appearances, they naturally, automatically believe the appearances to be truly existing. They don't even have to think about that. Whereas when the yogis perceive the appearances, they simply just perceive the appearances in the relative truth. The ultimate truth is beyond existence, non-existence, beyond all the concepts, beliefs, views, beyond all the extremes, beyond time and space and all of that references that we talked before. But in the relative truth, the yogis, when they perceive the appearances, they simply just perceive the appearances. There is no additional sort of delusion there of thinking that the appearances are truly existing. And also we discussed about how between the ordinary beings and the yogis, there is a communication between them. And yogis, out of compassion, they will use everything that can be used in the relative conventional world. The language, reasoning, logic, examples, and everything that can be used, the yogis will use to communicate, to convey their viewpoints that how things appear is not truly existing. And also, because of differences in their viewpoints, when this kind of communication happens, there is bound to be some sort of a clash, some sort of a debate between the ordinary beings and the yogis. But here, in these two lines, Shantideva is saying that the communication doesn't only happen between the ordinary beings and the yogis. The communication also happens among the yogis. Because within the yogis also, there are yogis with different degrees or different level of understanding of the relative and the ultimate truths. And in Buddhism, as many of you may know, that there are mainly 4 philosophical schools. There are Vaivashika, Sautrantika, Citamatra, and Madhyamika. And if you go into further details, then there are quite a lot of sub schools. For example, within the Madhyamika school, there are mainly 2, Swatantrika and Prasangika. And Shantideva belongs to the Prasangika school. Prasangika school follows the tradition coming from Buddhapalita, Chandrakirti, and so on and so forth. Anyway, these 4 main philosophical schools of Buddhism, they have different understanding of the relative and the ultimate truths. For example, I'm not going to go into a minute details because it's going to be too complicated, and I also lack in knowledge in order to be able to go into such details. But if I try to give some sort of a gist, then the Vaivashika and the Sautrantika, they come from the Shavakayana. They believe that the whole phenomena, the whole gross phenomena, the universe, the galaxies, the solar systems, the planets, the earth, the land, trees, houses, cars, tables, chairs, and all this gross phenomena which has some sort of a structure. These schools believe that they are relative truth. If you analyze these gross sort of a phenomenon, gross structures, gross things, what you will find is they are made of countless atomic particles. And these schools believe that that is the truth. That is all that is there in the ultimate truth. The shifting, the moving, the changing subatomic particles in the space and in the time. That is all that is there. But the deluded beings, the ordinary beings, they don't see that. What the deluded beings we see is that when these atomic particles come together and create a certain structure, let's say a structure of a table, then what we see is a structure that we believe is one solid unit. And then categorically, we label them as well. The table, chair, house, and so on and so forth. But if we analyze these gross structures, then as I said earlier, all you find is innumerable atomic particles shifting and moving and changing in the space and time. That is all that is there. If you analyze the table, let's say that you smash it into atomic particles, you break it into atomic particles, and you spread the atomic particles in the space, you cannot find the table. You cannot find the spot where you can paste that label. And that is the truth of the whole phenomenon, that everything that you look around is nothing but labels. And the biggest level these schools mainly focus on is the level of I, self, that we truly believe exists, truly exists. And in the similar way, when you analyze, it's only the coming together of the body and the mind that suddenly we have come up with the concept of truly existing self. But if you really analyze, the body is made of innumerable atomic particles. The mind also is very partless, momentary sort of existing phenomenon. So therefore, you have nowhere that you can actually point and say this is self. And they focus on that very particularly and establishes a view of selflessness of the individual person quite thoroughly and completely. But they believe that the atomic particles, and if you use this specific terminology coming from these schools, then that partless atomic particle, partless, they add the word partless. The partless atomic particles truly exist. And the Chittamatra school, the only mind schools, they have their sort of ways to analyze the atomic particles, very profound analytical processes they use, which I think will come in the 9th chapter as well, later on. And when the Chittamatra analyzes the atomic particles, they do not find the truly existing atomic particles. So therefore, the Chittamatra, they would say that there is nothing outside that creates the external structures, the external phenomena. It is the mind. It is the mind that creates the whole phenomenon. And there are few differences. There are differences depending on which school of the Chittamatra tradition that you are talking from. But let's not go into that details. Basically, they would say that everything that you see as an external object is in reality nothing there outside, but created by your own mind. But this school, the Chittamatra school, believes that the mind exists in the ultimate truth. And if you go into very specific sort of a definition, then self-luminous, partless, momentary consciousness, that they would say truly exists. And in Madhyamika school, they would analyze the mind as well. They have many different ways to analyze the consciousness. And we will not go into the details of the analysis right now. The result of the analysis is that Madhyamika believed that there is no consciousness that you can find that is truly existing when you analyze the consciousness. So therefore, the Madhyamika school establishes the view of complete emptiness, the view of union in a complete sense. So now you can see within the yogis also, we are talking from the philosophical schools. If you talk from the paths and bhumis, you can talk these differences within the yogis in that way as well, but not to complicate too many, complicate ourselves at this point. Talking from the philosophical schools, you see that there are differences in terms of understanding of the relative and the ultimate truths. So therefore, within the yogis ranks, the lower in degrees of insight, the lowest in degrees of understanding of the relative and the ultimate truth are confuted by the higher, those who have a higher sort of understanding of the relative and the ultimate truth. They confuse the viewpoints of those yogis who have inferior sort of understanding. I don't know whether the word inferior would be appropriate here, but let's use that. Inferior in terms of understanding in comparison to the yogis with the higher insight. Okay, then the third line of the fourth stanza. By means of the examples that the yogis and the worldly both accept. So this one we have discussed on the first day as well. When the yogis communicate to the ordinary beings, they'll use everything that can be used, every tools and instruments that can be used and are available in the conventional world. Reasoning, logic, and examples, and so on and so forth. And obviously, the most effective sort of tools that the yogis can use is undoubtedly the reasoning and the logic. To communicate, to convey their viewpoints to the ordinary beings. But this logic and reasoning needs to be supported by two things. One is Buddha's example, and then the other one is examples that the both parties agree. And we may underestimate, the examples, such as the example of dreams, the example of mirage, the example of illusion, and so on and so forth. We may underestimate these examples, but these examples are quite important sort of tools because the logic and reasoning, they are kind of like abstract. It's abstract and not everyone has an inclination towards intellectual sort of analysis and all of that. But the examples, the ordinary beings can, not only can, but they have experienced experientially also. For example, the dreams. The ordinary beings also have experienced dreams. They have, when they are sleeping, they have they have dreamt things and situations and so on and so forth. And the ordinary beings also understand that in dreams things appear and yet they are not real. So that's why the example such as dreams becomes quite an important sort of tool, and the yogis will use these means to convey their viewpoint to the ordinary beings. That is what is being said here in this line. And I may have said this last year when I was teaching Shiksha Samuchaya. Some of you may remember that it's just my observation, maybe true, maybe not, that when you look at the Shastras and the Sutras, it seems like the Shastras are very focused on the analytical processes, the analysis of the ultimate truth and so on, so like that. The analysis is emphasized quite strong in the Shastras. But if you read the Sutras, Buddha gives lots of examples, more than the analytical processes, the analysis. Buddha gives lots of examples. And understandably also, from a very narrow sort of viewpoint that I have, I kind of like my own sort of a small understanding is that it is understandable as well, because the examples such as dreams, mirage, all of these, they are quite experiential. The ordinary beings, they can actually experience them. The things appear, yet they are not real. They can actually experience it. So therefore, in sutras, when you read the sutras, more than the analysis, you'll find the examples. And they are very strong instrument to convey the viewpoints to the ordinary beings. And now the fourth line of the fourth stanza. And for the sake of the result, analysis is left aside. Now, this is a very important statement. I don't know whether I will be able to do justice here. You see, earlier in the beginning of this chapter, Shantideva began by talking about there are two types of beings, and also talked about communications, not only between the ordinary beings and the yogis, but also within the yogis as well. This is because I think it is kind of like setting the, it's almost like preparing the, preparing for the things that are going to come in this chapter. Because quite almost all of the texts, and particularly the 9th chapter, is very conversational. There's always conversations and communications happening, sometimes between the ordinary beings and the Shantideva, and sometimes among the yogis, Shantideva and the other yogis from other schools. So here, the ordinary beings kind of ask questions to Shantideva. They ask, if everything is illusion, then that means samsara is illusion. Nirvana is illusion. Enlightenment is illusion. The path is illusion. The practice is illusion. If the path and practice, if they are like an illusion, if they don't truly exist, then their question is, what is the point? What is the point of practicing? Why do we have to practice generosity, discipline, diligence, and so on and so forth? For that question, Shantideva replies with this line, and for the sake of the result, analysis is left aside. This is a very important statement. Analysis is left aside. Madhyamikas, particularly the Prasangika Madhyamika, here we are talking about, Shantideva belongs to that school. Prasangika Madhyamika, when they analyze the ultimate truth, they analyze it thoroughly and completely. The Prasangika Madhyamika do not do a half-baked analysis. That is not their style at all. When they analyze the ultimate truth, they analyze it thoroughly and completely, and establishes the view of the union, which is beyond existence, non-existence, beyond all the extremes, beyond concept, views, and beliefs, and time and space. There is no debate at that time, no debater, no one to debate, all of that. But there is a relative world as well. For the yogis as well, there is a relative world. And when the yogis are relating to the relative world, where there is an undeceiving dependent arising of the cause and effect, yogis will simply accept and appreciate the cause and effect and the appearances. They would not deny. In the relative truth, the yogis would not deny the appearances. The yogi would not deny the cause and effect. They will leave aside the analysis of the ultimate truth in the relative truth. They would not go into the details of analysis. We discussed about this on the first day as well, that when the yogi is thirsty, the yogi will simply ask for a glass of water and then drink the glass of water to quench the thirst. That's the relative world. And yogi will not deny that by drinking the glass of water will quench his or her thirst. Yogi will not deny that cause and effect. Yogi will, in fact, appreciate and accept that cause and effect. So therefore, in the relative world, yogi will not analyze whether the glass exists or not, whether the water exists or not. It will only make things complicated, even for the yogis, if they have to go into such analysis in the relative world. They would simply accept and appreciate the appearances and the cause and effect and drink a glass of water. In the relative truth, the yogis will leave aside the analysis of the ultimate truth and appreciate the undeceiving dependent arising of the cause and effect. So in this reality, in this relative truth, the samsara exists, the enlightenment exists, and the path exists. And the yogis also accept that by following the path, by practicing the generosity, discipline, diligence, meditation, and so on and so forth, it resolves into the understanding of the ultimate truth. It resolves into eventually the realization of the ultimate truth. So therefore, these undeceiving dependent arising of the cause and effect yogis will not deny when they leave aside the analysis of the ultimate truth and simply appreciate the appearances and the cause and effect. So therefore, even though the path is like an illusion, not truly existing, for the sake of result, right? It says for the sake of the result. Path results into you to understand the ultimate truth. Path results into you to eventually realize the ultimate truth. For that sake, the analysis of the ultimate truth is left aside, and yogis simply accept and appreciate the path and the result, and so on and so forth. The fifth stanza. When ordinary folk perceive phenomena, they look on them as real and not illusion. This then is the subject of debate where ordinary and yogis differ. So now again, the ordinary beings are presenting a counter argument by saying, okay, if the yogis accept the appearances, we ordinary beings also accept the appearances. Basically, both parties are accepting the appearances. Then why do we have to debate? There is no reason for us to debate. There is no purpose for us to debate. You also accept the appearances. I do also. And to that, the Shantideva says that there is a big difference. There is a big difference. The ordinary beings, when they perceive their appearances, they see them as truly existing. Whereas the yogis, the appearances, as I said earlier, is just simply appearances. Nothing more than that. There is no additional delusion of thinking the appearances is truly existing. So therefore, yogis, they simply appreciate the appearances, the cause and effect. They do not deny them in the relative truth. And therefore, for them, because they don't have the delusion of thinking they are truly existing, they are not clinging to the appearances. They are not clinging to the relative world of the cause and effect. And that is also why we say the relative truth, or I guess we can say post-meditation situation of the yogis. The relative truth is mata nyamga. Mata means the analysis is left aside. Nyamga means joyful. So the relative world of the yogis is considered very joyful because they don't do the analysis. They simply appreciate the appearances without thinking that they are truly existing. Simply appreciating appearances as appearances. But there is a difference between the ordinary and the yogis, and therefore there is the debate, there is a differences. Stanza number 6. Forms and so forth, which we all perceive, exist by general acclaim, but not by valid reasoning. They are false, just like, for instance, unclean things regarded in the common view as pure. So again, as I said earlier, this is a very conversational. The whole text is very conversational. The ordinary beings here is again presenting an argument or a counter-argument. I don't know, do you say counter-argument? What they are saying is, how can you say the form does not exist? How can you say the sound does not exist? How can you say the flavor does not exist? How can you say the texture does not exist, and so on? Because I can see the form. I can hear the sound. I can smell the fragrance. I can taste the flavor. I can feel the texture. they should exist. They should truly exist because I can perceive them directly through my sense consciousnesses. And to that, Shantideva replies with this stanza, saying that your belief that the form exists is just simply by following the crowd. Your belief that the sound exists is also similarly, just based on following the crowd. Because everyone around you, your families, the society, the countrymen, the world, the majority of them believe, the appearances to be truly existing. Form is truly existing. Sound is truly existing. Flavor is truly existing, and so on and so forth like that. And you have just joined the crowd. You have never analyzed whether the form exists or not, truly exists or not. You have never analyzed whether the sound truly exists or not. You have never analyzed whether the texture truly exists or not, whether the feelings truly exist or not, whether emotions truly exist or not. You have never analyzed. You have just simply joined the crowd. I think the word used here is general acclaim, right? Your belief is based on the general acclaim, not on your valid reasoning. You have never analyzed whether they exist or not. So therefore, by just saying that I can see the form, so the form should exist, truly exist. I can hear the sound, so therefore the sound should truly exist, is not a good argument. And Shantideva also gives an example of their false, just like, for instance, unclean things regarded in the common view as pure. So in generally, we also believe that bodies to be clean and pure and something beautiful, particularly when you are struck by desire. Your partner's body becomes very beautiful, clean, and so on. But then if you analyze, that's not the reality. So there are things like that. Now they stand two first lines of the stanza 7. But that he might instruct the worldly, our protector spoke of things. So here our protector is referring to the Buddha. So this argument is presented by the Shravakas, I think. So here the Shravakas are saying that the form, sound, body, mind, and all of these, they should truly exist because the Buddha in many different sutras said that the form and sound and body and mind and so on, they exist. And not only that, Buddha has said that the nature of the form and sound and so on is impermanence, is momentariness. And Shravakas here is saying that these teachings are ultimate teaching. The teaching on the impermanence is the ultimate teaching. So how can you say the form does not truly exist? Sound does not truly exist. The body does not truly exist because Buddha said so. Their sort of an argument is because Buddha said they exist and their nature is impermanence. So therefore they should exist. To that, Shantideva replies with these two lines by saying that the teachings on the impermanence is not an ultimate teaching. The teachings on the impermanence is we call it a Dangdun. I don't know how to translate that, but maybe for the sake of communication, to make it easy for us, I think we can say relative teachings. Relative teachings. The teachings on the impermanence is the relative teachings. And Buddha had many students, and not all students had same sort of capacity and faculties to understand the ultimate truth. There were students who were strongly attached to the appearances. They are not ready yet to let go of that attachment. They are strongly attached. And also they were not the perfect vessel for the ultimate teachings. And to those students, Buddha had to skillfully, gradually lead them to the ultimate sort of teachings. So therefore, to those students, Buddha said, the form exists, the sound exists, and their nature is impermanence. And though these students may not have understood the ultimate teachings, ultimate truth, but just by understanding the momentariness of the compounded phenomena, the understanding of the impermanence, to some extent they have, they are kind of letting go of that attachment. Maybe you can say maybe they are, by the understanding of the impermanence, they are one step closer to the truth. So that is also what, even though they are not a perfect vessel to receive the ultimate teachings, but just the understanding of the impermanence is kind of helping those beings. So therefore, basically what Shantideva is saying here is that the teachings on the impermanence is not the ultimate teaching. The teachings on the impermanence is a relative teaching. And then the third line says, but these in truth lack even momentariness. In the ultimate truth, there is no momentariness. There is no impermanence. In the ultimate truth, there is no time. The ultimate truth is beyond time, space, and all the concepts and extremes. So therefore, the teachings of the momentariness and impermanence is a relative teaching. The fourth line of the seventh stanza. Now, if you say it's wrong to claim the momentary as relative, now the Sharvakas are presenting another counter-argument, saying that if you say the momentariness or the impermanence is relative, then the relative truth should be visible to everyone. The relative truth should be visible to everyone. The ordinary beings should also be able to perceive the impermanence. The ordinary beings also should be able to perceive the momentariness, because the relative truth should be visible to everyone. If you say that, and therefore what Sharvakas are trying to say by presenting that argument is, because the relative truth means that it should be visible to everyone, therefore the ordinary beings also should perceive the momentariness, the impermanence, but that is not the case. The ordinary beings, they cannot see the momentariness. They cannot see the impermanence. What they are trying to prove by presenting this argument is the teachings on the momentariness should be considered ultimate teachings. Because if it is a relative thing, then it should be visible to the ordinary beings, but that is not the case. Because it is not visible to everyone, therefore, the teachings of impermanence and momentariness should be considered ultimate teaching. To that, Shantideva replies with the 8th stanza, there is no fault. For momentariness is relative for yogis, but for worldly beings ultimate. Where it otherwise, the common view could fall the yogic insight into corporal impurity. So basically, Shantideva is saying there's no problem here. I think we touched this point on the first day as well, that the relative truth does not mean that it should be visible to everyone. Because there are so many things in the relative reality that the ordinary beings are not able to perceive, not able to see, such as the karmic cause and effect. It's not directly visible to the ordinary beings. The rebirths, the past lives, even what is happening in the other planets, we cannot perceive them. There's so many things that, just because they are relative truth doesn't mean that they should be visible to everyone. Similarly, there are things such as momentariness, impermanence, which is very subtle and very hidden from the deluded beings. So for the deluded beings, though momentariness and impermanence is the reality of the relative world, it's not clearly visible to the ordinary beings. So therefore, though momentariness is a relative sort of a reality to the yogis, and the relative truth in general, but the ordinary beings, because it's something very hidden, something very subtle, difficult to perceive the momentariness. For the ordinary beings, they become kind of like an ultimate of the relative truth. That is what is being said here. Were it otherwise, the common view could fall the yogic insight into corporal impurity. If the relative truth means that it should be visible to everyone, then, when the yogis look at the bodies, they see the bodies as impure, a kind of like a bag of filthy, disgusting things, like flesh, blood, pus, and bones, and everything that is there in the intestines and all. But the ordinary beings, they don't see it like that. The ordinary beings, when they look at particularly to the person that they have love towards, they see their body as something very beautiful, pure, clean, and all. So either the yogi must be wrong, or the ordinary beings must be wrong, right? So if the relative means that relative truth is based on the belief of the majority, then the yogi looking at the corporal body as something impure and unclean should be, how do you say, should be considered a wrong perception. The yogi looking at the body as something very dirty, filthy, and so on and so forth should be considered a wrong perception or a misconception. But that is not the case. So the relative truth also does not mean that it is based on the belief of the majority. There are things that majority of the beings believe it's clean, but in reality is actually not clean. There are things the majority of the beings believe to be permanent, but actually is not permanent, is impermanent, momentariness. So there are you know, things like that. So therefore, as we said earlier, the path, right? The path to enlightenment. The path is also relative truth. But do ordinary beings able to see the cause and effect of the path? No. So there are so many things of the relative truth that is not visible to everyone. Okay. We have run out of time. Yeah. The next few stanzas are not very difficult, so maybe I quickly skim through. The earlier stanzas were quite important ones, so I took some time, I think. The ninth stanza, through a Buddha who is but illusion, how does merit spring, as if the Buddha were existing truth? So basically, Shavaka is saying, if you say the Buddha is like an illusion, how can you accumulate merit by making frustrations to the illusion like Buddha, by making offering to the illusion like Buddha? And the Shantideva is saying, just simply as you believe the Buddha to be truly existing, and by making offering and prostrations, you believe that you accumulate truly existing merit. In the similar way, we also believe that by making an offering and prostrations to the illusion like Buddha, we accumulate illusion like merit. So there is no problem with that. And the third and fourth line, but you ask, if beings are like illusions, how when dying can they take rebirth? Now this is a very important one. But I think we have no choice but to skim through it now. So, okay, the Buddha is like an illusion. And they're asking, are beings like an illusion? Are beings also not truly existing? And the Shantideva is saying, yes, beings are also like an illusion. And now the argument they are presenting is that if beings are like an illusion, then how can they take rebirth after they die? It should be like a magician creating a magical illusion of a man. When that magical illusion of a man disappears, no matter what effort the magician put to recreate the magical illusion of man that has disappeared, the magician will never be able to recreate it, because there was this interruption in the between. Whatever the magicians will create will be a new magical illusion to man, not the continuity of the earlier one. So similarly, when someone dies, it's almost like disappearing, they are saying, disappearing. This, I think, is, this counter-argument must be presented by the ordinary beings. So they are saying, it's almost like disappearing. So how can that same illusion like beings can continue by taking rebirth? To that, Shantideva replies, as long as the conditions are assembled, illusions likewise will persist and manifest, because the conditions are present there. Conditions such as ignorance, conditions such as afflictive emotions, conditions such as karma is involved, are assembled. So therefore, the illusion of the beings, the illusion like beings will continue by taking rebirth. What now the third and fourth lines of the 10th stanza? Why through simply being more protracted should sentient beings be regarded as more rare? So now the ordinary beings are saying, making a counter argument, saying that the example and what is the meaning? The example and the meaning are not comparable. They're saying that magical illusion may continue for a few seconds, maybe for a few minutes, maybe for an hour. But magical illusion of man created by a magician cannot continue for, eons and eons, life after life. But the beings, they have continued from the beginningless time till now, eons after eons, life after life, and it will still continue. So there is a difference between the magical illusion created by the magician and the illusion like the beings. There is a difference. Because beings have continued for so long, they should truly exist. That is the argument here. And the Shantideva is saying, just simply saying they have continued for so long does not make certain beings anything real. Because the conditions to continue has been assembled. So therefore, the illusion like beings have continued till now and will, if the conditions are assembled, will continue in the future as well. But that does not make beings not illusion, not truly existing. Now, the 11th stanza. If one kills or harms the magical illusion of a man, there is no mind in such a thing, and therefore there is no sin. But beings do indeed have mirage-like minds. Sin and merit will in consequence arise. So now the counter-argument from the ordinary beings is that if beings are illusion, then by killing the beings, you should not have committed sin. You should not have committed the non-virtuous deeds. Because let's say a magician creates a magical illusion of a man. If you kill that magical illusion, you do not commit sin of killing someone. Because that's just a magical illusion. If certain beings are like an illusion, then by killing them, you should not be committing sin, and by doing something beneficial to them, you should not be, accumulating merit. To that, Shantideva says there's a difference because the beings have a mirage-like mind. Beings have illusion-like mind. But magical illusion created by magicians do not have mind. So therefore, there is a big difference. Now, 2 lines from the 12th stanza, and then we'll end it here. There is no power in things like spells, so mirage-like minds do not occur through them. So what basically here Shantideva is saying is that no matter how much effort the magicians put into creating a illusion-like mind, magicians will never be able to create mind. There is no spells, there is no ingredients, there is no substances that can create the illusion-like mind. So therefore, no matter what kind of realistic magical illusion of a man magicians create, that magical illusion will never possess, because magicians have, cannot create. I guess this is something to think about in the age of AI. Okay, that's it for today.